If you're the one handling Section 16 filings, you know what a stressful job that can be. Making an error is a serious business, even if you're not the one that caused the problem. After all, the issue reflects poorly on one of the top officers of the company or a member of the board of directors, and they're not happy. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek. I'm a big fan of use. Section 16 is such a weird area. The filing obligations are those of your insiders, your top officers, and all of your directors, but those important people get to rely on you to make the filings on their behalf. They execute a power of attorney to give you and a few others the legal authority to do this for them. That power of attorney is filed with the SEC, typically when the first Section 16 report is filed for them on Form 3, or perhaps the next form, which would be a Form 4 thereafter. Then it's all you, and you'll be making perhaps as many as a dozen Form 4 filings for each insider per year. That's lots of room for error. They give you the wrong numbers to input into a Form 4, or one of their brokers or trustees does, or maybe the filing agent you've hired to send the filings to the SEC via the SEC's Edgar screws up somehow. Of course, you might be the one that makes the error. After all, you're only human. But it's just inevitable that someone makes an error at some point. It's just inevitable. Here are 5 things you should know about fixing Form 4 errors. 1, can we adjust the filing date so it's not considered delinquent? The worst kind of error is the one that causes the Form 4 to be filed too late with the SEC. Perhaps you didn't know about the transaction, the insider or one of their agents did not tell you about a trade that was made, a transaction of some sort, until more than 2 business days has transpired since that trade took place. Thus, you missed the Form 4 filing deadline. Or maybe it's your fault. You got too busy and you just forgot to make the filing. The real penalty for a late filing is that the insider whose filing is late will need to be identified by name in the next proxy that's filed with the SEC. That delinquency will then be highlighted for all the world to see. As noted in my Vid-Guide about item 405 of Regulation SK, that's the item that elicits this delinquency disclosure in the proxy, and how you go about doing that. Alan Dye joins me for that Vid-Guide, a link of which is beneath this video. You can disclose mitigating factors, including describing generically, who's to blame for the delinquent filing. You don't have to identify the person by name who caused the filing, but just generally that it was an administrative error or it was a third-party error, but you don't even have to identify the third party. Anyway, see my other Vid-Guide and you'll see some examples of that. But still, even if it's a third party that caused the error or you caused the error, the insider has to be identified as the person that had a delinquent filing, and they hate that. They just hate that. The SEC will not allow you to adjust the filing date if you contact them to explain the reasons for your error. You say, that insider, they didn't cause the error, it was us, or it was a third party. Doesn't matter who's to blame. The only type of reason that the SEC staff might be willing to adjust the filing date is if you can demonstrate in good faith, with a good faith effort, that you attempted to file the report timely and that it just couldn't be filed timely due to technical difficulties beyond your control, like an act of God, a hurricane knocked out all the power in your region for a day. Or maybe your reason is that Edgar was down on your due date. Edgar was built back in the 1980s. It's creaky and it's down more often than you would think. It's not capable of accepting filings. So, remember back in the day when your Wi-Fi would go down every so often, your internet in your house or at work? That happens with Edgar. So if your filing isn't made on time because Edgar is down, that's something outside your control and a technical reason, and a good reason that for the SEC to adjust your filing date so that your filing is not considered delinquent. 2, can we withdraw the Form 4? So let's say you filed a Form 4 by accident. Maybe it's a duplicate of one that's already been filed like 2 days ago, and for some reason you filed it again, or someone else in your office thought they were supposed to be the one tasked with filing the Form 4, so they're doing it at the same time you're doing it, and you just both make the same filing at about the same time. It happens. That's really going to confuse the market. So you contact the SEC, and they just say, tough. It's on you to amend the filing to explain the problem. The bar is extremely high, where the SEC will actually get involved and get into the business of withdrawing the filing. They're going to only expunge a filed report if it has personal, sensitive information that is protected by the Privacy Act. And even then, it doesn't really matter, because once something is on file with the SEC through Edgar, there's other services that republish all the information that gets filed with Edgar, and you're not going to be able to go and chase that information down and get that expunged as well. The dog is out of the gate. What's that saying? The cow is out of the barn, something like that. 3, deciding whether to file an amendment to a Form 4 or just correct the error in the next time you file a Form 4 for that insider. So minor errors happen all the time. I mean, all the time. Minor errors, it's so easy. And when they do, they're often fixed, if they're minor, in the next Form 4 that's filed for that insider, as opposed to filing an amendment to the original form. I say this with the caveat that Alan Dye is so good at saying all the time, that the SEC staff has never come out and said it's okay not to correct a minor error, not to amend a Form 4 for a minor error. But the SEC has never brought an enforcement action based on minor errors. So that gives you some relief if you go about fixing the error in your next form filing. So to decide whether to file an amendment to a Form 4, you have to determine whether the error is material. And there are plenty of circumstances where it would be definitely material, such as an incorrect transaction code suggesting the availability of an exemption from Section 16B when no exemption is available, and plenty of other circumstances. This materiality determination is not one, obviously, in the context of the company's overall financial picture. It's in the context of whether there could be Section 16 consequences. It's in the context narrowly of that insider's Section 16 picture. Of course, if you feel like you're not sure and you're sort of in a gray area, you want to err on the side of caution as always, and just file an amended report. It's not that, doesn't take a lot of effort. If the original Form 4 was timely filed, the Form 4 doesn't suddenly be considered a late filing just because you're now filing an amended report, even if the amendment is made after the filing deadline, unless there's extreme circumstances where the original Form 4 is so deficient that it wouldn't really be considered a real Form 4. So that's pretty extreme circumstances. Anyways, this is not how the delinquency analysis works. If your original Form 4 is filed on time, even if you amend it later, you're going to be okay. And this is borne out in the 1992 interpretive letter that was granted to the American Society of Corporate Secretaries by CorpFin 92, so that's almost 30 years ago, indicating that this is the position the staff takes for all companies. So being worried about being late is not a reason not to amend a form. When you're filing an amendment, the amendment speaks as of the date of the original Form 4 filing. You don't need to go back and include all the subsequent events. If you have any new transactions to disclose, any other changes, those would be made in their own Form 4s. Of course, you can voluntarily update it, and you might want to explain what's going on by describing all that in the footnotes. If you do file an amendment, you'll note in box 4 that what was the original filing date, the date of when the Form 4 was first filed. You should also disclose that in the footnote, that when you talk about the reasons why you're filing this amendment form, of when the date of the first Form 4 was filed. So you're going to do that in 2 places, in the box 4 and in the footnote 2, just to make sure the reader understands what's going on here. By the way, you're allowed to wait for the annual catch-up filing, the Form 5, to report any omitted holdings, transactions that were supposed to be reported during the year but were forgotten. That's one of the reasons why the Form 5 exists, to allow insiders to become whole for stuff that they forgot to file over the year. By being whole, I just mean that all the insiders' reports are now in, they're current, but not necessarily timely. Of course, there's consequences for being delinquent. That consequence starting with the embarrassment of having that proxy disclosure identifying the insider as having a delinquent Form Section 16 filing, a Form 4 during the course of the year. The Form 5 is due within 45 days of the end of the company's fiscal year. But most folks don't like to wait. You know, if they find out that they've missed filing a Form 4, they're going to file it late as soon as they find out that it's late, rather than waiting till the Form 5. First of all, that will then give the market correct information as soon as possible. And then they also don't want to risk forgetting the fact that they forgot to make a filing. So they're going to do it while it's still on top of mind. 4, how do we tell the market what the error is? So Form 4 is a short form. It's 2 pages of small boxes. The only spot to do that is to add footnotes, an explanation in the footnotes themselves. So use that to your advantage. Give your explanation for what you're doing, as for why the error was caused. The reason can be very short. In nearly all cases, the reason is due to an administrative error. And then you go on to explain what the error exactly was, what the corrected information is, what the incorrect information originally was, what the date of the original filing was. And so you're going to do all of this for an amended Form 4, and then also you would do all of that if it's a subsequent Form 4 if you're using that as a vehicle to explain minor errors. So you didn't amend the report, you're just filing, this is just in your subsequent, your next Form 4, and you're explaining that, by the way, we're correcting this error. 5, you're permitted to fix selectively. So when you amend a Form 4, you need only to tinker with the line item or footnote being corrected. You don't need to redo the whole form. There's an exception here. If a line item is being deleted, you need to redo the whole form. If you're deleting a transaction or a holding, you'll need to re-report that line item from the original filing and then explain in the footnote that the line item is not new or revised, and of course explain the reason for the change. So let's look at some examples of real fixed errors on amended Form 4s and subsequent Form 4s. So here's an example of an administrative error where the number of shares for a sale by an officer was reported. You can see here the numbers are reported in the table in 5 spots, and then footnote 2 indicates the date of the original report, what the error was, and describes what the changes are. Here's one that misreported the number of restricted stock units, RSUs. Here's an example with incorrect stock option expiration dates. Here's an example where the number of shares that were withheld to cover taxes and fees was originally misreported. And here's one where the range of prices where a bunch of stock sales were made in a short period of time was misreported in the footnote of the original filing. So again, you might be filing a correction for something that was wrong in a footnote. So here, the weighted average needs to be fixed. Here's something that other things were being fixed, but as long as they're doing that, they're changing something from direct when it should have been indirect. And I like this one where they footnote each amount in Table 1 separately rather than have one big footnote and then that footnote in each of the boxes. Here's one that says, hey, our director comp was late. So this company had a bunch of Form 4s that were late. There's no need to identify, if you are filing late, there's no need to identify in the Form 4 that, hey, this is past the due date. You'll be disclosing that in the proxy. That's required disclosure. Each insider will be identified and named. But I like the transparency. But it's kind of funny, the reason here. It's not only saying it was due to administrative error, it goes on specifically to say it's not the fault of the directors. And you might even have errors right off the bat on your first Section 16 filing for an insider, the Form 3. This one's sort of an unusual because it's a former 10% owner, so it's not a true insider, the way I think of them, officer or director. And this is a company that went under 10% as part of an IPO, but I just throw it in here to indicate, yeah, you might have an error in your Form 3 too. Let me know what you think.